Welcome to Vanishing Gates. You may or may not have heard an intro right there. I'm having technical difficulties. The software that I use to record, because what I do, for those of you who don't watch the live streams, I record and live stream from one program and then break the audio down on another program to put on the podcasting formats. So if you're listening in podcast land, there might have been an extended silence. If you're watching this video, you would have at least had something on the screen to signify that we were going. I can't tell until after it's been recorded whether or not that audio was saved for the intro music. So I apologize if it wasn't there. Hopefully it would have been. Anyway, again, I'm Jay. This is Vanishing Gates, your source for the strange, the unexplained, the paranormal, the superstitious, serial killers, downright weirdness, just strange stuff. And in keeping with our October Halloween scary topics theme, I wanted to talk a bit about a couple stories that come out of Japan, urban legends, because they're pretty creepy ones. I'm going to be reading partially from typed notes, and I'm going to be speaking as well from just like random thoughts that hit my head. So if it seems a little disjarred, I apologize in advance. So the first one I want to talk about, I'm sure a lot of you know if you're into the strange and the unexplained and the supernatural, if you're into like creepypastas and whatnot, and if you're into like urban legends or horror movies, you'll probably know this topic. And this is Kuchisake Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman. According to legend, Kuchisake Onna was a human woman who was mutilated sometime during her life. Her mouth was slit from ear to ear. In some versions of this story, Kuchisake Onna was an adulterous wife, maybe a concubine to a samurai or a shogun or something like that during her lifetime. As punishment for her, infidelity, her husband sliced the corners of her mouth from ear to ear. Some versions of the legend state that her mouth was mutilated during a medical or dental procedure, and that maybe another version is a jealous woman who didn't like her because she felt bad about how pretty she was comparatively, actually cut her gave her the cuts. There's another version as well that when she opens her gaping mouth, she just has rows and rows and rows of like huge teeth, tons of teeth. But anyway, after her death, the woman returned as a vengeful spirit. Now in Japan they call that onryo. As an onryo, she covers her mouth with a mask, a fan, perhaps a handkerchief. She also carries a sharp object of some fashion with her. The most common is scissors, but there's also been stories of machetes, scythes, and things like that. A knife, a kitchen knife was one that I had heard. She said to ask her victims if they think she's attractive. And she often phrases in the Japanese as watashi kiri. And I believe I'm saying that right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Basically translates to, am I pretty? Am I beautiful? Kind of like the do you find me attractive question. If they answer no, well, she'll just straight up kill you. And if you answer yes, she'll take off her mask and show you the ghastly visage underneath. And then she'll ask the question again. Or she'll ask something like kore demo, I think it is, which translates to even with this or even now or like this kind of thing. If the person responds with a no or screams in fright, she'll kill them again, just shank. If they respond with a yes, she'll slice the corners of their mouth from ear to ear. Makes it look like her. Her grisly image would be like implanted on you at that point. That's as far as I can tell anyway. There's lots of iterations. But one I found online that seems to be the most common for the origin story of Kuchisake Onna. Again, I'm reading from notes sometimes, so forgive me. It was from the Heian period of Japan's history, and I'm pronouncing that terribly wrong. Roughly 1,200 to 800 years ago. The version of this story was that the wife of a samurai committing adultery, and the story was originally a cautionary tale to remain faithful to your spouse. And that was kind of the end of it. Like, she cheated, he gashed her up, and then she was like a haunting spirit. And it took a darker turn during the 70s. During the 70s, like late 70s, I want to say 78 or 79. The story got around that of Kuchisake Onna would approach people walking alone at night and wearing a surgical mask. And that wasn't just people in general. I mean, it would go from wandering folk, traveling people alone at night, but it caused a bigger problem when it became about kids. But there are older stories prior, because this urban legend or this tale seems to come and go over decades. So it would like fade off and then come back and fade off. And some stories, it would be an adult she'd approach. And wearing a surgical mask in Japan isn't uncommon. It's a courtesy. They're a very courteous culture a lot of the time. And so if you had a cold or something, you wouldn't want other people to get sick. And so it's still very common to see people walking around in surgical masks. So if an attractive young woman, I mean, they say between 25 and 30 something, like early 30s, it's still pretty young. I think it's young. I'm nearing 40. Damn it. But so if it's like this, if you're walking alone and a pretty young gal walks up to you with her hands behind her back, wearing a surgical mask, which then isn't a big deal. And I mean, this posture, when you have your hands behind your back, can be considered very flirtatious. And so if she does that thing where girls like to go up on their tippy toes a little bit and rock back and forth, you might think she's just openly flirting with you. It would just be it wouldn't be off-putting. It would just surprise you, startle you. And then she goes into that, like, do you think I'm pretty? Well, that's when things get pretty south pretty quick. So this story, like many other urban legends, I think now we just call them creepypastas because people type them out on the computer. I'm sure there's a basis of fact to most of these, but I'm not sure what yet. Maybe we'll explore that later on in the show. It was spread widely, though, among young teens, many of which faced very long walks at home from school. This is, again, during the late 70s. So, I mean, a walk at home, I read in some places it would take maybe 45 minutes, and often it was at night because schools are slightly different there, I guess, than here. I don't know for sure. I've never gone to school in Japan, so correct me, guys, if I'm wrong. Politely, please, don't hate me. So you're walking alone at night, and you're a kid, and you're hearing this woman will attack you or accost you or whatever. And these kids spread it around like wildfire. That's how most of these stories like really take root, at least when I was a kid. Now we have the internet, and God knows how much faster it works. We'll get to that. But I looked for news articles about this, and I couldn't find anything myself. But again, I wouldn't know what news sources to look at. I don't have a microfiche machine or access to anything from Japan in the 70s in the newspapers, and I don't read Japanese. So I'm not sure how much of this is true, but it did seem to cause a bit of hysteria. I mean, hysteria to the point where parents are freaked out because they're hearing from their kids. The kids are freaked out because the story's going around. The teachers are freaked out, so now they're walking the kids home at night, dropping them off themselves. The police force apparently even got involved and like expanded their patrols and put a much larger police presence. And that's not a small thing when the police get involved and do that. So we have this mass hysteria apparently, just spreading like wildfire. It seems like, and everyone's freaking out because it's not just about some hapless young guy now being approached by a beautiful woman. Now it's kids going, hey, this woman's going to walk around by a lamppost, and if you get close to her, she'll confront you. I did read in another page that a coroner, on another like page, I can't remember what website it was, that a coroner in 2007 found a death record that recorded someone who was hit by a car and killed while she was chasing children around. And it was speculated from that website that that woman might be the reason the story came back to surface in the 70s. I mean, back in the 70s and then again in the 2000s. It hit Korea, I think, in 2004 or something like that. And so it spreads. So it gets creepy. You're alone at night, or just in general, I guess, at this point. And now you're hearing this. And could you imagine being just a gal walking around with a surgical mask on, just trying to avoid eye contact with people because now they might think that you are this monster? I don't even want to think about it too much, man. That also must have been a harrowing experience in itself. So what do you do when you're faced with Kuchisake Onna? Because what if this is true? So what do you do? I mean, you can say no and then die immediately, which is not the path I would choose personally. Seriously, I'm more of a fight than a flight kind of guy. I mean, just dying if I know it's going to happen. trying not to do that. You can say yes, and when she pulls her mask and asks again, you can scream, and then she kills you. You can answer yes again, and she gives you a Glasgow smile, which for those of you who don't know, that's the term for that ear-to-ear cut. Uh, then she kills you. You can try to not answer and run away, but it doesn't seem to matter where you run. She'll be right in front of you again. So that's not helpful. Basically, until you answer the question and die. There may be a few ways to survive this horrid setup, though, according to other legends. Because again, this is an urban legend, so there's lots of different retellings. There's small pieces missing here and there, or that change here and there. You can tell her she's so-so, or she's okay, and run if she tries to figure out what you meant by that. But most stories, again, relate back that she'll just find you later while you're in your bed and still cut you and kill you. Some people say you can toss candy at her. Apparently she liked candy. And while she's confused, you can run away as she's looking down at the candy. But again, she might still track you down. The best answer that seems to work in these stories, all around, it seems to be to tell her you have a previous plan. You had something else to do. Usually at that point, being a polite society, she will just go, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then walk away and leave you alone. That seems to give the best result to survival. So you have to go down that first path of, I mean, I wonder if you start that way. Like if a girl just approaches you in a mask and you say, "Oh, I have plans." I wonder if she'll just avoid the situation altogether, or if because I didn't find a direct storyline there between, well, you say it before she takes off her mask, or you say it after. So you never know. Now, Kuchisaka Onna has been in tons of movies and has done a fair amount of invading pop culture. I mean, we're talking magazines, cartoons, everything. And kids here in Northern California, I'm talking like fifth graders know this story. And I know because I was doing research and my kids were like, "Oh, we know about this." And I'm like, "How the heck do you know about this?" And they couldn't give me a straight answer. And I'm pretty careful on what my kids do online and social media. I'm pretty uptight about it. I don't want them involved in that too much. But I know that there's other ways to get that information, and you can't watch them 100% of the time. But it's kind of interesting in this culture, like this character, this person, this, whatever you want to call her has been, I mean, widespread. She's not as well known in a lot of places, apparently, but in lots of parts of the world, I mean, tons of films, video games even, graphic novels, again, cartoons again, mangas, toys are made after her. I found a freaking makeup editorial about how to look like her online. There's even some very pseudo-mainstream movies. Yeah, I said that here not too long ago that are about her, the slit-faced woman. So I know it's a creepy story, but I wonder like if there's a reason that it's so easy to spread this story around and how it spreads. It's really hard to find, especially with the increasing power of the internet and the ease of access. It's tough. And again, I try to pay attention to what my kids are doing online as much as I can. I'm very uptight about social media. I'm uptight about like YouTube for the most part. We watch scary movies, but I get to explain to them while we're watching them, "Hey, this is fake. This is what the effect is." But I know as a kid, we had a ton of stories we'd tell. And our parents would tell us these stories, and their grandparents would tell them these stories. So it gets spread around that way. So that brings me on to the next topic. Another story out of Japan. And this is going to be, I didn't want to go too in depth on information and writing up my own commentary. So there's a couple things I'm going to take from. I'm going to read directly from Wikipedia, and I'm going to read directly from yokai.com about an article I read there. So, from Wikipedia, Teki Teki or Teki Teki, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, guys, is a Japanese urban legend about the ghost of a young woman or schoolgirl who is said to have fallen onto a railway line where her body was cut in half by a train. She's an onryo as well, like so was, Kurosake. Oh no, I'm going to have a real hard time saying that for the rest of my life. Or a vengeful spirit, who lurks in urban areas and around train stations at night. Since she no longer has a lower body, she travels either on her hands or her elbows, dragging her torso and making a scratching or tiki-tiki-like sound. If she encounters an individual, she'll chase them and slice them in half at the torso, killing them in such a way that mimics her own disfigurement. That was from Wikipedia. Now, here's the excerpt from yokai.com. The legend. In the years after World War II, an office worker in Muroran, Hokkaido, was assaulted and raped by American military personnel. That night, she leapt off a bridge onto the railroad tracks and was hit by an oncoming train. The impact was so forceful that her body was torn in half at the waist. The severe cold of the Hokkaido night caused her blood vessels to contract and prevented her from bleeding out quickly. Instead, she squirmed and wriggled about for help for several minutes. She crawled all the way to a train station and was seen by an attendant. But instead of trying to help her, the station attendant just covered her with a plastic tarp. She died a slow, agonizing death. According to legend, 3 days after hearing this story, you will see the ghost of a woman with no lower half. The ghost is that of the woman hit by the train. The ghost will try to catch you, and escape is impossible, even in a car. The ghost can crawl at speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Some say that the ghost is searching for her legs, which were lost when she was cut in half. Others say that she is angry at humanity for not helping her when she was dying, and that she's simply out to slaughter as many people as she can. When she catches you, she will tear you in half and steal the lower half of your body. Shortly after hearing the legend, she will ask you a riddle, either in a dream or in a mysterious phone call. The only way to escape death is to answer her questions exactly the right way. First, she'll ask you, "Do you need your legs?" You must reply, "I need them right now." Then she will ask, "Who told you my story?" You must reply, "Kashima Reiko." Ka as in mask, Shi as in death, Ma as in demon, Rei as in ghost, and Ko as in accident. If you answer her riddles without mistake, she may just let you live. Now, there's other versions of the story, one of them being that if you're in a bathroom stall, she'll come in while you're doing your business, and she'll just straight up ask you if you need your legs, and regardless what you say, she'll probably just yank them off you. There's other versions that you can still have that same response. There's other versions that she'll come to your house and cut you in half if you escape her. There's another version where instead of any of those things, she'll chase you down if you're walking alone near the railroad tracks on a dark night. And you'll hear the scraping of her nails, tiki, 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 as you go along, and then she'll come out of the grass with a sickle. Like, I don't know why she'd have a sickle, but all right. Another weapon that Kurosaki Onna had was a sickle, was another possibility. So I know that these stories cross paths a lot from what I've been reading. But the reason I bring this story up, though, because I didn't do too much research on it, but as I was talking about how these legends travel and the stories we were told and we told back as kids, there was a story very similar to this story, to the Teki Teki story, that we told as kids around the campfire, at sleepovers, at school to scare the crap out of each other, at parties, whatever. If we'd get like doing a backyard camp out, we'd start talking about the hook hand, we'd start talking about all this other stuff. But there's a story that stuck with me, and it really had a real good memory of it when I heard this story for the first time, when I read about this Teki Teki thing, or Tiki Tiki thing. And it's about a man who was an escaped convict who didn't have any legs, but he grew out these long, sharp nails. And he would follow kids home at night, or even they're walking along the street, and you would hear this click, click, scrape sound as though these long, and sometimes we told the story differently. I don't remember exactly where I heard this story first. I don't remember if I heard it from a friend, my dad. I don't remember if I read it in a book. But it's very similar to this Teki Teki thing. And this is before we had internet access that I heard this story. Or we had it, but it was super limited. I mean, we weren't doing much of all with it. So I didn't hear it from there. Maybe I had a friend who did. Maybe I had friends whose parents were stationed overseas, or maybe one of our friends that had been here for a while that knew the story. But I'm not sure exactly when this story started to go around, because even though it's the original set in World War II era, it doesn't mean that that's when the story gained prominence in Japan. And I should have looked that part up with a slightly deeper dive into this one, but I didn't. So forgive me for that. Heck, maybe if that story was around, then it came home with troops, and that's how I heard it. It was from a parent, or my dad or something, or his dad, who served in World War II and whatnot. But the story got around, and in our community, but it was slightly different. There was very big similarities, though. A half-bodied creature walking around and would get you. I don't remember exactly how the story went because we there were definitely different iterations on who you asked about how the story goes, but that's how all these urban legends work. You never have a very, very solid historical, marker for it. It's always just similarities, but it's not 100%. I mean, that's with any of these things, though. That's why you have so many versions of it. And then, you use these stories sometimes to scare the crap out of your kids. Well, you don't want your kid to drown, so you tell them a story about something in the water that can grab them. Stay away from the water unless I'm there until they learn to swim. So we do these, we tell these stories on purpose. It's part of our survival mechanism, maybe. But again, it's not to say that something like this wasn't inspired by some actual event. I mean, like the slit mouth woman, there's a historical possibility there that she existed. There's a possibility that the story regained that resurgence when that coroner found that death certificate and whatnot. So you don't know if there's a conglomerate of things, or if it's just one story, or if we're just making it up, or if there's just some real reason that we as humans hear these stories and we just know them, or that we tell these stories. I heard someone once talking about, you close your eyes and your brain can't make up faces. So when you're sleeping, there's things you can't do. Like you can't create a face when you're sleeping, and you can't read while you're sleeping. And I know it's funny, but try to read a book in your dream. If you ever think, if you have one of those dreams that you remember, try to remember what you were reading. And apparently you can't do it. I'm not certain. I haven't really been there for it, but I have tried to remember road signs and dreams when I'm driving that I can't remember. I just kind of knew where I was at. But there's another one that we can't create faces. It's always a conglomerate of something we've seen. So if you've ever had a nightmare of something just horrendous, and you see its seething face, see its claws, what are you seeing? Are you having some kind of remedial memory that's coming back? Because that's an idea that I've heard. So that's possibly creepier itself. We talk about these archetypes like the boogeymen and whatnot. We talked about La Llorona recently. We talked about all sorts of stuff. And I mean, even with alien abduction and stuff, whether people are being abducted or not, I couldn't tell you. I'm not sure. I'm not sold on any idea until, I see some solid evidence. So don't be offended. But there's so many people that see the same exact kind of creature, especially with like these gray aliens. There's almost nothing to them aside from big eyes, either no nose at all, or two little slits, or something very like unfeatureless, and a slit mouth, and a kind of ovular head, or like a tear-shaped head. Well, they're not seeing anything of detail. They're not noticing the wrinkles in the forehead or scar tissue. They're seeing a very bland image across the board. So maybe that's just, I remember in art class when we were learning to draw faces, you would make an oval shape kind of like that to start, and then you'd make two curved lines, one top to bottom, one side to side. And that's how you'd map out the features of the face. We think about symmetry of the face and what we think of as attractive and beautiful, and we think of like, I'm quite aware that my face isn't totally symmetrical, and I'm fine with that. But some people get really uptight about that. Well, think about it. Maybe, we're seeing something when we were a kid, when we were babies, maybe we were looking up at our parents or the people around us. We were maybe getting a conglomerate memory of those faces that stuck into our, the recesses of our mind, just hidden memory. I don't know. Or maybe these two things are actually out there and they're right behind you right now, and they're going to get you. Better memorize those questions, kids. Seriously. No, it's right behind you. Listen to this in the dark. Anyway, all right. So thank you for listening. I know this is a shorter episode. I'm going to try to keep my solo shows a little shorter just so I can make more of them pre-recorded. It's just easier on me. And then if I don't want to make them super short and I want to put them together, I can. It's easier to fill, half an hour than it is to fill 2 hours of just vain jangling. So I do want to thank you guys for those of you listening on the podcast forums. Thank you, formats. Thank you very much for doing that. Please keep liking the shows, downloading the shows, and share them. Have other people download them. It helps us tremendously. If you haven't caught up with us on Facebook, it's Vanishing Gates on Facebook. Same as the name on the podcast, really easy to find. I'm not super active on the social media Twitter stuff, but I do tend to like to respond to people when I can. Anyway, if you have stories of the unexplained, if you've encountered any of this, if you know more about this stuff, if you are a historian when it comes to these kind of stories and legends and you want to be on the show, fine, email me, vanishinggates@gmail.com, one word, two G's in there. Send me a message, and I would love to set up a time where we can get you on the show as a guest. Heck, maybe even do a live stream. That way you can answer questions in chat. That would be awesome. So for those of you who normally watch this on the Facebook live stream, I may air this live tonight. If I don't, I apologize, but we will have a live show because it is a Sunday. I haven't set exactly the parameters of what days I'm doing the shows again because I'm trying to get through the Halloween season and I'm trying to give more shows than less shows, the higher quality, and a little more information like we used to do because we've kind of been lackadaisical, I'm not going to lie. Anyway, so follow us all around there. We appreciate everything you guys do. And if there's any topics you'd like discussed or guests you'd like to have on, hit me up and I will try to make that work. I'm Jay. And one second. Mouse, always technical difficulties. Good nightmares.